Welcome back to the Movie Man. Today I will show you a 1998 American romantic fantasy drama film, Meet Joe Black. Spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. The movie opens with a picturesque view of a mansion at night where a man is shown sleeping holding his arm. He is none other than William Parrish, who's a multimillionaire and has run a successful empire for the past 40 years in New York. He wakes up suddenly holding his arm in pain and walks to his washroom when he hears a voice say yes. He ignores this incident and walks to his bed. Once again, he tries to fall asleep and hears the same voice saying yes. We then see Allison, Bill's beautiful older daughter, organizing a birthday party for her father in their mansion. Allison shares her grand ideas for Bill's 65th birthday celebration, and he takes the opportunity to express his dislike over parties when Susan, Bill's younger daughter, comes in. We go on to meet Drew, who arrives in a helicopter, who is also his second daughter's love interest. Drew greets Susan with a light kiss. Drew and Bill soon start talking business. Bill tells him about the voice he heard last night. Everyone is quite concerned for him. Bill is then greeted by Quince, who is Allison's husband and also Bill's business partner. Bill and the others board a helicopter where they continue their business talks. Andrew takes it as a sign for them to take the merger deal that they'll be discussing soon as a partnership with another huge business mogul. During the ride, Bill asks Susan if she loves Drew. Susan is taken aback by the question. She replies by saying it wasn't something comparable to the relationship between her father with her mother. He again asks if she wants to marry Drew, but she just hesitates. Bill approves of Drew as a business partner, but he wants to make sure of what Susan thinks of him, as he saw no passion in her love. He advises her to be open to possibilities and levitate in love. He wanted Susan to think with her heart and fall madly in love with someone. Susan agrees to her father's request, and once they get to the city, the men head to their office. Susan goes to a coffee shop, and behind her, a man is seen speaking loudly at a payphone nearby. He's encouraging someone to pursue their dreams and not give up. Susan is intrigued by this man and finds his support sweet. The man then sits at the bar and apologizes to Susan for being loud on the phone, clarifying that he was talking to his baby sister who just broke up with her boyfriend, as he cheated on her. He admits that it never lasts between a man and a woman, but adds that he's a one-woman man. He says he would never hesitate to change his career for the woman of his dreams. Their chemistry and attraction for one another is very imminent at this point. He even jokes that Susan might be the one for him after their meeting. He predicts Susan to be a doctor, and she agrees while chuckling, as the coffee shop is usually filled with doctors. Meanwhile, Bill suddenly feels a sharp, stabbing pain in his chest. The recurring voice tells him yes again, and Bill is confused. When Bill responds that he didn't ask a question, the voice teases him, saying that he did have a question before and is simply getting an answer to it. Back at the coffee shop, Susan and the young man enjoy each other's presence. The man states he's just doing simple jobs to do some good, but intends to get a better job when he starts a family. He claims that he'll give up anything to find the right woman. Susan notes that it'll be hard to find the right woman. He replies that lightning could strike, catching her curiosity. They both part ways without learning each other's names, and they walk away from each other. Both turn to the other at different times while the other is oblivious as they walk away, but they continue without a word. Finally, the man turns towards Susan to see her gone, but then, he gets hit by a car and is put to eternal sleep on the spot. At dinner, Allison discusses plans for the party, but Bill remains uninterested. The same voice from before tells Bill that he's at the front door, so Bill asks Lillian, his maid, to check if anyone is outside. When Lillian returns, she tells Bill that he has a visitor. Bill slowly heads to the library to meet his visitor. As he goes to meet his visitor, the same voice continues in his head. He spots an odd figure behind a bookshelf and asks who he is, and the voice explains that he's been around for eternity but wants to look around before taking Bill with him. A young man finally reveals himself in front of Bill. He finally realizes that the young man is the personification of death, but death wants a holiday from his taxing, eternal responsibility of taking the souls of the dead to the afterlife. He chooses William to be his guide and strikes a deal with Bill that as long as Bill shows him around the world of mortals, Bill will get to live a little longer. Temporarily doubting his sanity, he finally agrees. Lillian interrupts their conversation and Death invites himself to their dinner. Bill refuses to have him at this table, but Death stresses that he cannot refuse. The two join the rest at dinner, and when asked, Bill claims the other man to be an old friend. Bill hesitatingly introduces him as Joe Black. The family is puzzled by the sudden appearance of an old friend of their father's whom they have never met. Joe is introduced to William's family at a dinner at his house when Susan arrives a few minutes late. She immediately recognizes the young man she met earlier that day. But the young man as Death is unfamiliar with the practices of mortal men and does not remember their original meeting. He acts awkwardly around her and she is confused and upset by his sudden odd behavior, very unlike his actions earlier that day. When Bill asks Death about his encounter with Susan, he explains that he took a young man's body to blend in with the mortal world. Drew asks where Joe will be staying, to which he claims that he'll be staying at Bill's house, and Bill doesn't refuse. Bill shows him to a guest room where Joe will be staying and leaves him there. Joe wanders around and ends up in the kitchen. He introduces himself to the staff and becomes curious about peanut butter. He loves the taste of peanut butter and happily eats it while wandering to the indoor pool where Susan is swimming. Susan reasons that Joe is in a big deal with her father as he invited Joe to dinner and offered him a place to stay in his house. Joe asks her if she loves Drew, but she tells him it's none of his business. Joe apologizes and admits that he's not used to people as his duties have made him vary. The next morning Bill heads to Joe's room and admits that he's glad to be among humans. They go to his meeting and Joe insists that Bill allow him to accompany him everywhere he goes. Joe and Bill enter a board meeting where a merger has been proposed to the board of Bill's company and Drew actively supports the transaction, but Bill as chairman rejects the proposal. Drew is very antagonistic towards this sudden, new old friend of Bill's, and is disrespectful and rude towards him. After the meeting, Joe visits Susan at her hospital where he meets an old woman. She's instantly wary of him and recognizes him as a spirit. She thinks she's going to die, but Death assures her it's not time. She begs him to take her pain away, but Death refuses to say it's not his job. Instead, he shows her a beautiful memory to ease her pain and she goes away satisfied. Susan is delighted to see such kindness in him and gets closer to him. He goes back to Bill, who exclaims after his wife passed away, he always feels empty, and becomes convinced that Death is now after him too. He describes the first time he met his wife like it was just yesterday, and Joe listens eagerly. Just then, Drew comes in. He tries to convince Bill to agree to the merger, but Bill doesn't want anyone using his company for just money and not its original purpose. At dinner, Quince agrees to Bill's policy about the merger and wants to present ideas of his own. Bill agrees and says it depends on Joe, but Drew takes it the wrong way after hearing it and tries to use it for his good. Finally, Bill presents a toast to his family and reflects on when his daughters were two little girls who loved their father so very much. Bill gets emotional and continues with whatever comes to mind, to show his appreciation for his daughters who have come a long way. Allison tells him he can sit down, rather than be confused mid-speech, and Bill does so. He so desperately wants to spend whatever little time he has with his family. He is heartbroken as he cannot say anything about death looming around him, but he stands up again and offers to have dinner with his family again. His daughters are surprised but delighted nonetheless. As dinner is getting served, Joe politely declines the offered food and asks for some peanut butter instead. Like and subscribe may look simple for you, but for us it's very valuable. Please like and subscribe. Thank you for your support. He asks for just a butter and prefers it not to be slathered onto anything else. Susan and Joe share their views on their comfort food, but Drew doesn't like it at all. Joe asks Susan about the Jamaican patient he'd met, and Susan tells him things aren't looking good even though they've tried everything. Joe offers his sympathy and says the woman is very appreciative of the care Susan is giving her. Drew is seemingly upset to see their conversation flow with such ease. Susan tells everyone that Joe stopped by the hospital and everyone is shocked. Drew's jealousy knows no bounds and he becomes condescending toward Joe. Drew leaves immediately as dinner is finished and Bill asks Joe why he visited Susan's hospital. Joe explains he doesn't know the answer and Bill asks about Joe's proximity to his daughter. On the other hand, Susan tries to talk to Drew, who is nothing but rude to his fiancée. Susan apologizes for getting close to Joe as she doesn't regret it. Drew is furious and leaves. Susan asks Joe's motive for getting close to her father, but Joe doesn't have an answer to that. Susan accuses Joe of being married, but Joe declines. He says he doesn't have a spouse, to which Susan asks if he's gay. Joe smiles and declines that too. Susan asks how come a man who's so handsome, intelligent, and powerful is so alone in this world. After Joe not replying, Susan understands his situation and agrees to leave Joe's life a mystery. Joe walks away to his bedroom to rest, whereas Susan walks to her father. Bill asks Susan where her interest in Joe stems from, and Susan simply replies it was his nature was simply striking and she's attracted to it. Bill tells Susan it would be better if she'd stop looking at Joe that way and focus on Drew instead. Susan is disheartened by it and asks what caused his change of heart. Bill simply shrugs and doesn't reply further. Susan heads to bed and Bill sighs. The next day, Drew tries to manipulate all the board of directors in Parish Communications to go against Bill and agree to a deal with Buntku. He urges everyone to join him as Buntku was hell-bent on taking Parish Communications. Drew capitalizes on Bill's strange behavior and uses information given to him by Quince. Drew even goes on to blame Joe for Bill's behavior, but some members tell him he's taking it way too far. Drew doesn't care and continues to use the board against Bill. At dinner again that day, Allison brings out a couple of cakes for Bill to try for the party, but he's too distracted from the fact that he might not even be alive till then. His change of behavior offends Allison and he apologizes. Allison breaks down in front of everyone and Bill tries his best to console her. After dinner, Susan and Joe roam around her dad's library. They flirt with each other and slowly fall for each other. They kiss under the fluorescent light. Joe is confused at first but gets the hang of it pretty soon. His knees buckle and his heart beats faster as he experiences this new feeling. He loves the taste of her lips and tongue. But just then, Bill walks in and Susan leaves immediately. Bill invites Joe for a night out with Allison and Quince, but he cordially declines. The next morning at the office, Bill is surprised to see a board meeting going on which he wasn't informed about. Drew tries to talk about the merger again, but Bill vehemently says no and wants no part of it. Bill is disappointed at his board for going behind his back to do business with a man who only wants profit and money. Drew inquires further about Joe, who was standing right next to him. Drew accuses Bill of listening and getting influenced by Joe in some big business proposals. Drew asks Bill to retire on his 65th birthday. He also persuades the board to approve the merger, which Bill had decided to oppose. Only 2 board members vote no to Bill retiring, and one of them is Quince. He's devastated by what happens to Bill as all but one other member of the board vote him out. Quince tells Drew that what he did is morally wrong, but Drew simply doesn't care. Instead, he mocks Quince for not being man enough and always apple Polish Bill. Quince is devastated to see Drew's true colors. In another scene, Susan and Joe meet again at the swimming pool. They kiss again as they can't resist one another. Susan grows tired of her relationship with Drew, beginning to see him for who he is, and is somewhat bewitched by the diffident, seductive, mysterious Joe Black. They have romantic moments and she tells Joe that she loves him. Joe enjoys the experiences of his flesh, of human feelings and desires, and is in love with her as well. Soon, their romance starts. This complicates matters, as Bill doesn't want death, that is Joe, to become involved with his daughter, and tells him that their deal didn't include this. Bill asks Joe why he chose him, and Joe simply replies that he's enamored by Bill and his ability to instruct, along with how well poised he is. Bill asks Joe what he truly wants. Joe warns Bill to be careful in front of him after Bill loses his temper since Susan's now in love with Joe. He leaves and goes to Susan's hospital with a bouquet, but much to his dismay, he finds out she's not in the hospital yet. At the house, Susan asks Bill about Joe's whereabouts and Bill tells her he doesn't know. He asks Susan why she wants Joe and she replies by saying all the things he said about her about being deliriously happy and being obsessed with a person was what she feels with Joe. Bill is angry at her response and decides to walk away. but Susan doesn't understand his reaction as she doesn't know what Bill does. She confesses that she's head over heels in love with Joe. Bill tells Susan that Joe is leaving soon and that she should be very careful about Joe. He yells at Susan and tells her Joe's up to no good. On the other hand, Joe meets with the same old lady he met before. She's glad that he's here to take her, but he claims he was there to see Susan. He admits that he's in love with Susan and she loves him back, but the woman isn't satisfied because Susan doesn't know his true self. The lady says she wants no flowers other than the ones in her casket, and Joe is confused seeing how opposite Bill and the lady were. The lady wishes him well and tells him she understands that he's lonely just like the rest of us. Joe asks the lady one last time if she wants to go and she says yes. She feels the sweet kiss of death close by and gives into it. Joe feels bad but understands what she wants and takes her soul while bidding her goodbye. Back home, Joe tells Bill it's time to go and Bill claims that he's ready. Joe tells him they'll leave soon after the party. Bill's 65th birthday on his large estate is a wonderful, perfect event. There he meets Quince and they talk about love. Quince tells Joe that Allison loves him for who he is and so does he. Quince drunkenly admits he told Drew that Bill completely depended on Joe and also confesses all of Drew's plans. Joe tells Quince to tell all of this to Bill at that moment and Quince agrees. Bill walks around and looks at Allison working hard for the party to be a success. He tries to apologize to her for not being the father he was to Susan and Allison forgives him for it even though it's evident that it takes her heart. She wishes him a very happy birthday but deep down, Bill knows what's coming and it's inevitable. At the party, Susan meets Joe and tells him that she knows he's leaving. Joe confesses that he doesn't want to leave her at all but has to. They both get emotional and hug each other tightly. Quince confesses everything to Bill and he forgives him. Bill tells Quince he wants to see Drew and speak to him and Quince tells him he'll send Drew his way soon. Joe tells Bill that he's taking Susan with him tonight. Bill is enraged saying that wasn't the deal but Joe doesn't care. Bill makes a last attempt to demonstrate to Joe the meaning of true love and all it encompasses, especially honesty and sacrifice. Bill tells Joe that Susan isn't in love with Death himself but with the body of the man Death has captured. Joe is adamant to get Susan. Bill urges Joe to tell Susan everything about him and let fate decide what happens next. Joe walks up to Susan who is so in love with him but she describes him as the man she first met at the coffee shop and quotes his words from there. Susan urges Joe to take her with him and even promises that she'd wait until he comes back. Joe comes to understand that his love for Susan means he has to sacrifice his desire to take Susan with him and allow her to live her life, and he abandons his plans to take her. Joe confesses that he loves her and he always will. They hug each other tightly and he leaves. Susan is devastated to see the love of her life go away from her. Joe tells Bill that he wouldn't take Susan with him anymore and it'll just be the two of them. Just then, Quince brings in Drew after compelling him to come to meet Bill. There Joe takes the stand and agrees to reveal his secret identity. Bill asks him not to do so. Joe claims to be an agent from the Internal Revenue Service doing an undercover investigation on him. Joe, as the IRS agent, uses his knowledge of Drew's actions and intimidates Drew into resigning from the company and board and to leaving Susan. He helps get Bill reinstated as chairman of the board. Bill devotes his remaining hours of life at the party to his daughters Allison and Susan. Joe glances at Susan from time to time and is utterly heartbroken, knowing that she'll never be his. Susan is also really upset because the only man she ever loved is going far away from her. They both long for each other and yet can't have it. Joe finally wishes Bill a very happy birthday and together, they look at the fireworks for a while before leaving the mortal world. They express their gratitude towards each other for everything that's happened in these past few days. A fireworks show marks the end of the party and Joe escorts Bill to the edge of the garden and Susan follows them. Joe takes Bill over the bridge and the two disappear. Susan sees them walking away and runs up to the bridge. She is surprised when Joe reappears and walks back over the bridge. Death has left with Bill. Joe is now the young man Susan met at the coffee shop at the start of the movie. The young man, unaware of the events which had transpired from the time of his death until his return, talks to Susan. After a few moments, Susan suddenly realizes that Joe is not the person whom she fell in love with. In sorrow, She realizes that Joe has left and she is now talking with a young man she met at the coffee shop. She gazes past Joe's shoulder at the spot where she last saw Death and Bill. Daring, she says to Joe, "I wish you could have known my father." She then asks him, "What do we do now?" He replies, "It'll come to us." She nods and agrees. They hold hands and walk back towards the celebration of life. That was all of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.